Hello everyone, thank you for joining and welcome to this month's Connect with Control-M. My name is Neil Blanford. I'm a TSA based in the Americas supporting Control-M. Today we'll be looking at Control-M SSL in 9.18, specifically how to secure server to agent communication. This is part 2 of our SSL webinar series. Previously we covered securing the EM client, which is available to watch on our YouTube channel in case you missed it. First, I'd like to take a moment to introduce today's panelists, Ronnie Cabrera and Mikhail Tiller. With that, let's look at our agenda. Firstly, we'll see what's needed before we start, and we'll discuss our scenario for today. Then there will be an overview of the process. We'll briefly discuss the steps here. Next is a demonstration. Here we'll take a Control-M server and agent system that's using TCP and configure it for SSL. After that, we'll discuss server configuration, and then lastly, there will be a Q&A session. Okay, so before we start, let's talk about what's needed for a successful implementation and our scenario for today. Firstly, roles. There are 2 roles here. First, your InfoSec team, and secondly, your Control-M administrator. Typically, as a Control-M administrator, you will need to request a certificate from your InfoSec team. How this is done will vary depending on your organization. As the administrator, you'll be responsible for importing the certificates and configuring Control-M to use them. You may or may not have to generate a certificate signing request or CSR to get the certificates. While the Control-M guide does cover generating a CSR, the creation of certificates is outside of the realm of Control-M. The application makes use of the provided certificates to secure information. And now let's talk about our scenario for today. For the demo, I'll be the Control-M administrator tasked with securing multiple agents. In this case, there are 2 types of agents we're going to talk about. The first is the default Control-M server agent running on Windows. Second is a standalone Linux agent in the DMZ, which is configured with a persistent connection. The first is straightforward. As we shall see, the next has additional considerations, such as having to copy the certificates over. We will be working with a commonly used PKCS12 file format, and our certificates have been provided by our information security team. All supported versions of Control-M support SSL configuration. In our case, the components will be 9.18, but you may have a mixture. We've attached knowledge article 153897 link in the attachment tab for more information on this. Now let's have an overview of what we will be doing today. The first step is to obtain the certificates. As we've discussed, how this is done will vary. In this case, we have our pre-generated P12 file for the Control-M server and agent. The next step is to generate the key store package. This is done using the Control-M manage_SSL BYO script on the EM server. After that, the created packages are copied over and installed on the respective Control-M components, that is the server and agent systems. And finally, we will configure them to communicate via SSL. We'll also take a look at how to revert to TCP if needed. This would come in handy if you have an expired certificate, for example. And with that, let's move on to our demo. I'll just share my screen here, and we'll see our configuration manager, and we'll take a look at our environment before we get started. What we have is our Control-M server and agents currently used to communicate via TCP. So let's take a look and confirm that. I'll right-click on the Control-M server and go to the properties. Under communication, we can see TCP is selected here. So let's close that and just take a look at one of our agents. We'll select the local agent here. Right-click it in the same way. Let's go to properties and the communication tab. In this case, it'll just take a second or 2 to load since it's going out to the agent to get the information, and we see secure socket layer at the bottom is set to default. Now, this means it's going to take its configuration from the Control-M server. And we can see if we click on it, we also have enabled and disabled. So let's cancel that. Another way to see how it's communicating is with the ag diag comm command. So let's go ahead and run that on our default agent again, ag_diag_comm. And it'll just take a second to run. And we see here TCP for the server to agent comm protocol. Now let's take a look at where we will be putting our certificates, etc. As you can see here, these are our PKCS12 files. In this case, they have a P12 extension, and you can see that we have both an agent and server file. As part of the process, we're going to run the BYO certificate script to generate the key store files, which are then copied over to control M components. So let's take a look at where these will go. C SSL, and as you can see, I have an agent and a server location, and this is where the certificate bundles will go. It's important to keep these separate so that you don't generate the certificate bundles in the same place, as this could lead to certificates being installed incorrectly. Now, before we get going generating the bundles, let's take a look at one of our P12 files. I'm just going to paste in an Openssl command here that we're going to use to open it up. Here you can see the command. One thing it's important to note here is that we're using the Openssl that comes with control M, and let's look at the parameters. So PKCS12 is the type that we're using, info, and then the file itself. So basically, it's going to open up and show us the certificate. So I'll just enter the password here. And there we go. Let's scroll up and talk about what we have. So you can see we have a server certificate first, and then we have our root certificate. It's important to include the entire certificate chain to make sure that it's complete. So you may have more than 2 certificates in here if you have intermediate certificates, for example. Now let's take a look at the private key that is also included here. And to do this, I need to enter the PEM passphrase. And again. And there it is. So we've got everything we need in this P12 file. So let's go ahead and generate the certificates. In this case, we're going to use the manage_SSL BYO utility. So let's go ahead and run that without any options first, so and see what we got. And here we go. You'll see here it gives you help output. If you do that, the important thing to note here really is the component values. And as you'll see later, we'll be using agent and server, but you'll see all of the other control M components listed as well. So let's go ahead and get our first command here. As it's a fairly long command, I'm going to copy and paste this in. This is going to generate the bundle for the control M agents. So before we run it, let's go and discuss it. As you can see, we've got the script, the input PKCS12, the component that we were just talking about, control M agent, and then we get on to the rest of it. So where it's going to put the bundle, as you can see, our CTMA_SSL folder that we have ready for it, the output key stores password. Now this is the password for the key stores that are going to be generated. Scrolling along, we see that there's a password parameter, and this is the password for the PKCS12, and then the actual PKCS12 file. Let's go ahead and run that. This just takes a few seconds, and then it'll generate it in the location we specify. So let's go and have a look at what we've got. CTMA SSL. You can see here the files it's created. The important ones to note are setup.bat and setup.sh. This is what we will be running later to install the bundle on our component. You can also see we have a certificate and a key store here. We also have a README file that contains instructions. So now let's go ahead and install this. What I'm going to do is go back one level, copy this, and we're going to go to our agent home location. Now this is going to be where we have the installed versions.txt file. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. You can see we have it now. And I'm going to cd to that location and ultimately run setup.bat. So let's do a dir to make sure we're in there. There we see everything. So we're going to run a_SSL /setup.bat. And there it is. Let's go ahead and run that. Just takes a second or so to run and gives us confirmation that the SSL certificates for Control M agent are successfully set up. Now let's take a look at the second agent. As I mentioned, this is a Linux agent and it's remote. So there are a couple of additional steps we need to get the certificates over there and installed. I'm going to use some commands to compress and copy the certificates, but you can use whatever works best in your environment, as these are general OS commands. First of all, we're going to compress the package with a simple 7-zip command. Paste it in, and it'll just take a second to run. Now I'll go back and copy it over. I'm just going to use the FTP feature here to select it, SSL, and we generated it in there, and there it is, ag.tgz. So we'll open that. This is going to upload it, and there it goes. So now let's uncompress this and run it. So let's do an ls first to make sure we have it. There it is, ag.tgz. I'm going to run a tar command, xvzf, and then our ag.tgz. And as you can see, there's our package unpacked just as before. Now what we're going to do is install them with the setup.sh on this Linux system. So I want to run it from the home directory. So moving back, we'll now generate the bundle on the Control M server and get going with that. So another command to paste in here. And this just takes a few seconds longer to generate as it's creating a few more key stores and certificates. You can see here it tells us what it's doing while it's going along. And we'll see the process is very similar to the first one we did. So we'll go back to Windows Explorer and see now. So let's go back to our SSL location. And there are our files again. We'll move it over with the copy. Go back to the Control M server home location. Now remember, we're looking for the installed versions, and we're going to go ahead and paste this in here. Now what I'll do is install it. So just as before, we're going to cd to that location, paste in the command, and then we're going to run from the server home setup.bat. So ctms _SSL setup.bat. And it just takes a second to install, just as it did on the agent. Now, at this point, the server and agent certificates are in place. So let's take a look at how we enable them. So for that, we need to go back to the configuration manager. And we're going to select our first agent here, the one that we had earlier. And just as before, we'll go to Properties, open the Communication tab, wait a second or two for it to load. And now we can see default. This time we're going to select Enabled here. Click OK. This just takes a few seconds to apply and refresh everything. And then we'll do our second agent, which is here. we select Properties. Just as before in the Communication tab, we would enable it down there. And this completes the certificate installation and agent configuration. At this point, the server and agents are now using SSL to communicate. One more thing I'd like to demonstrate on this is how to force a TCP connection to an agent that's using SSL but can't be managed from the CCM. So this might happen if there's an expired certificate or some other problem that means you need to go back to TCP to re-establish communication. Now, with a Windows agent, you can do this by CTM-AG CFG, and I'll just show you that briefly. So this is our default agent. We won't actually switch it back, but we'll see where we can do it. CTM-AG CFG. And on the advanced parameters, option number 7, you'll see number 8, SSL. And in this case, we're still waiting for it to refresh, but we would see Y here. So we would go ahead and edit this and make it N and restart the agent. So let's return to main menu, quit out of this, and we'll look at our Linux agent in a second. Going back to the CCM, you can see we've got another agent that's actually configured for SSL that's unavailable, and it's not communicating, and this is the agent we're actually going to look at. In this case, we need a terminal session. So here we are, and we're going to edit the config file on this. So let's go ahead and look at where we are. You can see we're in the agent home directory. First of all, what we're going to do is shut the agent down. So let's stop it. Just wait a second for it to stop. There we go, excellent. And we're going to CD to the CTM data directory. And let's do an ls. And here we see right in the middle, in green, config.dat. And this is the file we're going to edit to set it to use TCP. So there we go. At the bottom, we see comm SSL value is set to Y. So let's go ahead and change that to N. We'll save it just as normal. Then we can go ahead and start the agent again. But before we do that, let's go back to the configuration manager. Now, this agent's unavailable, but we can still see some properties. So let's take a look at what we can see. It loads fairly quickly, and we see secure socket layer is enabled in this case. So let's go ahead and disable that. We'll click OK. Disabling it here means that when the agent starts up, it won't try to switch to an SSL communication mode. So let's start the agent now. And just as when we were configuring it to use SSL, it's going to take a few seconds to start up and get itself straightened out. So with that, that concludes the demo. Let's go back to the slides. So let's recap the process. The first step is to obtain the certificates. As we've discussed, how this is done will vary. The next step is to generate the key store package. This is done using the manage_SSL_BYO script on the EM server. After that, the created packages are copied over and installed on the server and agent systems. And finally, we'll configure them to communicate via SSL, as we saw via the CCM. Let's talk about configuring the Control-M server for a moment. During the presentation, we configured agents only to communicate via SSL with the Control-M server. It's possible to configure the server itself to force the agents to use SSL. This is documented in the SSL guide. Be aware, though, that configuring the server will require that not only the agent certificates be installed, but also the EM server-side certificates be in place, as it enables SSL for all server communication. If you enable SSL on the server without these, you will lose connectivity where the certificates are missing. We will be having an upcoming webinar on EM configuration, but in the meantime, the entire process is documented in the SSL guide, which is linked from this session. And finally, thanks for taking time out of your day to attend this webinar. We hope the information provided is useful.